You are listening to the Fur Road Christian Church podcast. Our mission is to love God and love people. For more information about Fur Road, visit furroadcc.org. That is FIRROADCC.org. Now for this week's message.
Today, like I said, we're going to be connecting Moses and Jesus, separated by 1,500 years in the Bible, but connected in so many ways. And a lot of comparisons can be made in regards to Jesus and Moses. Now, do you fully need to understand all the connections to be a follower of Christ? No, but it helps us to get a fuller picture of the Bible and how it works, and a fuller understanding of Jesus as we study these things. And so, I think the older we get, as we compare, we kind of look back to the old days and, how good things were or how they used to be or they were better. This week it snowed a little bit here. Yay, right? Yeah! It snowed. So, some older people might be looking back, when I was a kid, it snowed like 3 feet and we had to walk to school both ways uphill and barefoot and we liked it, So we compare to the old thing from the past, the way it used to be. By the way, have you guys come down off your highs from last week from the Chiefs? Still up there? If you've been around long enough, you might compare this team to the one that won the Super Bowl 50 years ago and say, well, this team was better than this team, and you look at those kind of things. We tend to compare. It was exciting. It was like the 4th of July out here with fireworks and guns and all kinds of things. My dogs didn't like it too much, but it was an exciting day. When I think back to my childhood, I think of comparisons and maybe looking at like my junior high and high school years in the 80s. And so there's some good things about the 80s. There's some things that really needed to stay in the 80s. And so I thought of a few examples. For example, this was kind of late 80s, early 90s, probably more, but there was some big hair. Okay, some of you probably had some big hair. Okay, I'm not going to make you raise your hand, but the big hair needs to stay back there, right? Can we agree on that? Or for the guys, we had the mullet, right? Okay, that needs to stay there, right? Okay, that does not need to come back. I feel like you're talking about me right now. Keegan? I love it, Keegan. That is so awesome. Whew. Forgot about my nephew. All right. Yeah. How about boom boxes? Okay. I happen to still have my old, this was a small one, but remember they put these up here and play. Well, you can walk around, and some of them were huge, and mine had a double cassette player. Yes. And it still works. So I could put some Petra in there and jam on my Petra, and some of you guys know what that is. That's good stuff. You guys can look it up. So there's that. There were certain words or phrases that became popular. The word psych, it was used as another way to kind of tell somebody that you were just kidding or pulling their leg about something. For example, Larry would say to Bob, hey, who'd you get that ice cream for? And Bob might say, oh, I got this ice cream cone for you. Psych. Remember that? Okay, some of you do remember that. Or the word not. It was used in a different way. Jim might say, hey, Mike, do you like my new shoes? And Mike would say, oh, yeah, those shoes are really cool. Not. Yeah. Okay, probably needs to stay back there at that time, right? Another thing that should definitely not come back, and it's already starting to, is the length of basketball shorts at that time. And they didn't leave a lot to the imagination. And for example, I think we have a picture. It's kind of hard to see, but yeah. Look at that guy. Any ideas who that is? Yeah, that's me. I was a skeleton for one thing. I don't. That definitely should stay in the 80s. So that was my sophomore year of high school. Okay, let's move on. Oh no, actually, I was going to say one good thing from the 80s. Arcade games were awesome. Okay, this was like original generation. Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, Galaxian, Galaga, things like that. Space Invaders. Yeah, Centipede. Yeah, there were some really good ones. But it was basically a joystick and a button. Okay, that's all we needed. And now there's all this other stuff, right? What's that? I did. We need to just play that stuff like the good old days. And now I was playing Smash Bros. Against little Corbin Klingon. He's 5 years old, right? The other day, and he destroyed me. Yeah, it was bad. So I just need to stick to the old stuff. Okay, we're talking about comparisons. Okay, looking back. In the Bible, we have the privilege of being able to kind of look back, and we know that Jesus was greater than those who came before him. We can look back and see that, he was greater than kind of the big three, Moses and David and Abraham. But to the Jews at the time, to suggest something like that's a big deal, right? That was like fighting words. And so it would have been very hard for them to accept Jesus as greater than them. And so I would suggest this morning that it isn't about trying to prove that Jesus is better than Moses. For us, it's more about realizing how Moses helped prepare the way for Jesus. And, Jesus was the Son of God. And so Moses kind of helped get to that point. And so we are going to compare, though, along the way, some things about Moses and Jesus. First of all, we need to realize that Moses was merely a shadow of Jesus. Okay, shadows are a really cool thing. We've all played with shadows, make shadow puppets and even anywhere there's lighting, there's shadows, right? You can look around the room, you can see shadows on the walls. And it's just wherever the lights are. But here's the deal. Shadows are just shadows. They aren't the real thing, right? They don't compare at all to the real thing. And so listen to Hebrews 10:1. It says, the old system under the law of Moses was only a shadow, a dim preview of the good things to come, not the good things themselves. The sacrifices under that system were repeated again and again, year after year, but they were never able to provide perfect cleansing for those who came to worship. You see, Moses, like many of the characters in the Old Testament, they foreshadowed what was to come through Jesus. They were imperfect, but the perfect was coming. Okay, they were previews. Okay, Moses and the law were never perfect. When you watch movie previews, you're supposed to kind of get an idea of what the movie's going to be like. And sometimes you watch a preview and you think, oh man, that movie's going to be so cool. Right? And then you watch the movie and is it cool? No. Sometimes it's like, man, everything good was in the preview and from the movie. This is a preview that we know because we can see what happened, that it was way better than the preview. With Moses, there's a lot of cool connections. There's some cool previews, some things to look ahead. And so let's look at a few of those similarities. First of all, both Moses and Jesus were saved from a tyrannical leader. Okay, remember Pharaoh? He tried to kill all the Hebrew boys by throwing them in the Nile River when he was becoming kind of scared of the Hebrew people. There's so many of them. Okay, remember that? And Moses was miraculously saved. King Herod also tried to kill all the Jewish baby boys in Bethlehem. And he was scared also. And Jesus was miraculously saved as well because Joseph, remember, was warned in a dream, you need to go to Egypt. And he was saved there, really in the same land where Moses was saved. After Moses led his people out of Egypt, he was on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights getting instructions from God. on how to lead the people, what they were to do. Jesus was in the wilderness fasting for how long? 40 days and 40 nights, right? Before beginning his public ministry. The Last Supper that Jesus had with his disciples was, during the Passover meal. And that was originally established by Moses, and there are, a ton of things. We could just look at the Passover meal and see all the symbolism and the things that Jesus would do. Moses was a shepherd in Midian. Jesus was also a shepherd, okay, not of sheep, but of people. John 10:11 says, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. They both were considered very humble. Okay, and Jesus and Moses even had a conversation on the top of a mountain. Remember in the Transfiguration that's talked about in 3 of the Gospels. And you're going to read about some other connections in chapter 6 this week, so keep up with your readings. So there were a ton of connections between Moses and Jesus. They weren't just coincidences. God in his sovereignty used Moses to ultimately help pave the way for Jesus. But Moses was only connected to a certain group of people, okay? As we look back, Moses brought redemption to his people. If you remember the Hebrew people, which was basically Jacob's family, they were invited to live in Egypt when his son Joseph had worked his way up to Pharaoh's second in command in the whole kingdom. And remember, by that time, Jacob's name was changed to Israel by God after Jacob had wrestled with God. And that's why they'd be called the Israelites, okay, not the Jacobites. And the story of Joseph itself, it's an incredible story. Genesis 38 to 50 about, and so go back and read that sometime. But over 400 years that they were in Egypt, this tribe grew and grew and grew, and some of the later kings said, we don't remember this bond or this commitment we had to them, and they're becoming so great, so they turned them into slaves, and things got really bad, and the people cried out to God, and God chose Moses, remember, to rescue them from their oppressors. Exodus 6:6 says, Therefore say to the people of Israel, I am the Lord. I will free you from your oppression and will rescue you from your slavery in Egypt. I will redeem you with a powerful arm and great acts of judgment. Okay, so we talked about this last week too, but God called Moses out of the land of Midian where he was living in, and he said, I want you to come back, okay, and take your people out. He's talking to him through the burning bush. And it was a big job, okay, that there was maybe over 1 million people in this group now by that time. And when Pharaoh wouldn't let the people go as Moses requested, you remember there's a series of plagues, and they kept getting worse and worse, and Pharaoh sometimes would say, yeah, you can go, and then he'd change his mind. Finally, the angel of death came, and his own son was killed. And so he said, okay, go. And so they left, and then Pharaoh changed his mind. God hardened his heart, and so they went through the Red Sea on dry ground. After they got through, the water came onto Pharaoh's army. And Moses so they get to the promised land, or almost to go into the promised land. Things didn't go well. They started not listening to God already. But Moses was given instruction from God. He was given the 10 Commandments, but also other instructions as well. Instructions about worship, instructions about living, about building the tabernacle, all kinds of things. But God used Moses to bring redemption to this one group of people. Okay? This was foreshadowing of what Jesus would do, but Jesus didn't do it for one group, right? Jesus brought redemption to all of mankind. And so, if you're following along in your bulletins, Jesus brought redemption to the whole world. Okay, John 1:17 says, For the law was given through Moses, but God's unfailing love and faithfulness came through Jesus Christ. It kind of builds on itself. Okay, when you're looking big picture, it's only through Jesus that we can see God's unfailing love. And so, several things here. First, Jesus was the one the prophets predicted. in the Old Testament. Okay, when Jesus was putting together kind of this band of brothers, the 12 disciples, in John 1:45 it says, Philip found Nathanael and told him, "We found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." Okay, so Moses himself, the prophets themselves, weren't trying to say it's all about us. They were pointing to the future, right? And so these disciples, they're going to struggle at times to fully understand what's going on. But all of them except Judas would go on to do amazing things of spreading the gospel, of telling this message. And then look at this. Moses lifted up a pole. Jesus was lifted up on a cross. Okay, there's kind of a strange story in the Old Testament. I always thought it was kind of strange. When the Israelite people were out in the desert, they started complaining and grumbling, like they often would do, and they'd quickly forget and say, "Oh man, it was so good back in Egypt. Why didn't you just leave us there?" And they had been crying out to God when they were in Egypt. But so God kind of got fed up and said, "You know what? You're going to start paying for this." And he sent into camp. You remember? Snakes. Okay, poisonous snakes. And these snakes start biting people, and they're dying from these snake bites. Okay? But so the people saw this, and they're like, sorry, God. We didn't mean to. Stop it, please. What are you going to do? So snakes tend to get your attention, right? Okay, so God's plan for this, he tells Moses to build a snake, make a snake and put it on a pole and hold it up in the air. And if the people looked at the snake, then when they're bit, they wouldn't die from it. So in that kind of, just always thought, man, why did God do it that way? So Moses builds this bronze snake, puts it on a pole, and it works. They stop dying. And it seems like a strange little story until you tie it into the New Testament. Okay? John actually brings up that story in John 3:14 and 15. Okay? It says, "Just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes may have eternal life in him." Okay, Jesus was lifted up on what? A cross. The snake represented Satan and sin, and you remember the serpent in the Garden of Eden. And so God offered to save them from the effects of their sin against him. God saved the people from the snakes. And John compares that story to what Jesus has offered to do for everyone who believes in him. Okay, the pole that the snake was on compares to the cross that Jesus died on. But the cross can save everyone. And so this verse, those first 14 and 15 that talks about the snakes, leads into John 3:16. Okay, the most famous verse of them all. "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life." Okay, it's pretty cool, that reference. Did you realize that snake reference led right into John 3:16? I had never really thought about it much. And then we see that God provided bread through Moses, but Jesus was the bread of life. Okay, so for the whole time the Israelites were out in the wilderness, God provided this bread-like stuff called manna. It was sweet to the taste, and it sustained the people for 40 years. But as soon as they got into the promised land, it stopped. Turns out God used this manna as part of the bigger Bible narrative. Okay, the bread that God provided for them was temporary. Okay, they're only supposed to gather what they needed for that day. On the weekend, they'd gather enough for 2 days, so they didn't have to work on the Sabbath. And any extra manna they collected would spoil. But Jesus actually came to be the bread of life. Okay, not a bread that we actually eat, not a bread that spoils, but a spiritual bread that lasts forever. You see how it builds on itself. Listen to John 6:30 through 33. They answered, "Show us a miraculous sign." Okay, this is the people talking to Jesus. "Show us a miraculous sign if you want us to believe in you. What can you do? After all, our ancestors ate manna while they journeyed through the wilderness. The scriptures say Moses gave them bread from heaven to eat. Jesus said, I tell you the truth, Moses did not give you bread from heaven, my Father did, and now he offers you the true bread from heaven. The true bread of God is the one who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. Okay, so first of all, Moses reminded them, or Jesus reminded them that Moses didn't make that bread, right? That was from God. Moses was only a man. And now Jesus is offering a different kind of bread. Okay, a bread that isn't about sustaining you physically. It's about sustaining you eternally. And I love the symbolism here because, we're so food-oriented, right? In the Midwest, we like our food. Okay, I've never been accused of missing very many meals. But, as much as we eat one day, we're still going to be hungry the next day. I ate a ton of food yesterday at our family reunion, and I'm hungry right now. I could eat a big old cheeseburger one day. You think, man, that'll last a while. But no, we still get hungry the next day. The bread of Jesus is forever. And then Moses had to veil his face, but Jesus took the veil away. Let me explain. Do you remember after Moses would speak with God, he literally would glow. Okay, and so it was like too much for the people to handle. And I can just imagine what that would look like to kind of just see Moses glowing. And so he would actually have to put a veil over his face. And the glow gradually went away, and he was able to remove it from his face. But Paul talks about this in the New Testament. 2 Corinthians 3:15 and 16. Yes, even today, when they read Moses' writings, their hearts are covered with that veil, and they do not understand. But whenever someone turns to the Lord, the veil is taken away. For the Lord is the Spirit, and wherever the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. So all of us who have had that veil removed can see and reflect the glory of the Lord. And the Lord, who is the Spirit, makes us more and more like Him as we are changed into His glorious image. Okay, there's a lot of symbolism there in that the veil, Paul ties to the veil that is over our hearts before we decide to follow Jesus. Okay, Moses was just a man. When he was close to God, he got a glimpse of the glory of God. And it would fade away, though, okay? He was just reflecting the glory of God. Jesus actually was the glory of God, okay? And when we follow Jesus, this veil of sin is taken away. And you think about the temple curtain in our hearts is torn in two so Jesus can come in. And you remember after Jesus died and the temple curtain was torn. From where? Was it bottom to top or top to bottom? Top to bottom, right? It was coming from God. Jesus can tear that veil of sin from our hearts. And so when you put everything together, we see that only Jesus makes all things new. This is the good news. We divide the Bible into the Old Testament and the New Testament, but it could be the Old Covenant and the New Covenant because Jesus made it all new again. Jeremiah 31, verse 31 and 32 says, "The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to lead them up out of Egypt, because they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them, declares the Lord." Okay, the people didn't hold up their end of the bargain, and they broke this covenant. And remember, when we talked about covenants a couple weeks ago, there are conditions that are set and consequences for each party of the covenant. And God set the conditions and the consequences and said, this is what you're to do. And they broke that. And there's a price to be paid. And so in the Old Testament, we see kind of only the immediate consequences of the covenant being broken. In the big picture, we see that God was willing to pay the price for the covenant that had been broken. Okay, even though He wasn't the one who broke it. And so it's this amazing thing that God said, yeah, you broke it, but I'm going to pay for it. Because He loved us. And that price was paid through Jesus Christ. So if you put yourself back in the mindset of the Jew at the time of Jesus, okay, Moses was a big deal. Okay, he was a hero of their faith. And it's true, Moses was an amazing man. There's no doubt about that. But if you're comparing Moses to Jesus, there's really no comparison. You can't really compare the imperfect with the perfect. Moses played a very important role in history, but it would be meaningless without Jesus. You know, when we look at our lives, I think it's easy to think about the mistakes we've made and to think about, you know, I haven't really kept up my end of the bargain. I failed. You know, we have broken our relationship with God, and it's a big deal. It really is. I don't want to minimize that. It is a big deal. But the advantage that we have over the Israelites is that we can look back and see how God has worked throughout history. And we can look back and see how Jesus made it possible to repair the brokenness that was our fault, but He paid the price. And we can see how God has offered to repair and restore every single one of us. Every single one of us. I hope that you've allowed Jesus to restore you. And if you haven't done that, it's time. It's time. Because He's waiting and He loves you so much. He loves you enough to die for you. Let's pray. Lord, as we look at your word, and it's such an amazing book, and it's so fun to just kind of discover new things, and I've learned a lot just this week, just thinking about Moses and connections and the ways that he foreshadowed and led up to Jesus. Lord, I pray that each of us, as we kind of get a better understanding of your word, will just get a better understanding of how much you really do love us. Just how much you just want to take care of us and restore our broken relationship with you. And if we need to do that, if there's something holding us back, I pray that that barrier will go away today, that we can take away the veil of sin in our hearts and come running to you. We love you, Lord. It's in your name we pray. Amen.